My name is Rebecca Lell, and I was 34 years old on the morning I walked into family court, prepared to lose almost everything. My husband wanted the house. He wanted my company. He wanted both of our children. And more than that, he wanted the entire town to watch while he took it all. His mother had spent 2 months telling people at our church that I was cold, selfish, and obsessed with money. She told them I had pushed a good man out of his own home. Most of them believed her. Eventually, I stopped trying to defend myself. Then, just before the courtroom doors opened, my mother leaned close to me and whispered 2 words that made me stop right there in the hallway. 3 months after I signed everything over, every Mercer in that courtroom wished they had looked more closely at the very things they had fought so hard to take. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we share quiet stories about ordinary women who hold on to their dignity when the people closest to them decide to turn away. No yelling, no dramatic payback schemes, just women who understand their own value, even when everyone around them forgets it. If this is the kind of story you came here for, leave a comment below and make sure to subscribe, because it took me years before I was ready to tell this one. I started my business on a folding card table in our garage. That was 12 years ago, before Grant, before the children, before anyone in town knew my name. Back then, I had 1 client and a second-hand calculator with a number 7 key that stuck every time I pressed it. First, I handled the books for a feed store. Then came a diner, then a dentist. Slowly, one by one, the small businesses of Marysville, Ohio, began bringing me their shoeboxes full of receipts and their quiet worries about tax season. By the time I turned 30, Lell Bookkeeping had a real office downtown, 2 desks, and my name printed on the glass door. I still kept the original brass key on my key ring. It had been worn smooth after years of opening that office at 6 in the morning. People in town thought they knew exactly what I was worth. They were wrong in every possible way. They saw the office, the loyal clients, and my late father's good name, and they decided I must have been sitting on a fortune. What they never saw were the thin margins, the long hours, or how often I fixed other people's mistakes without charging them, simply because I could not stand by and watch a family lose everything over 1 bad number. That was the shape of my whole life. I was the person people leaned on, the bookkeeper who spotted the problem before the bank did, the friend who quietly helped cover a payroll shortfall, the wife who balanced a home, a company, and everyone else's expectations without ever asking anyone to carry something for her. I was good at carrying weight. I was so good at it that nobody, not even me, ever stopped to wonder what it was costing. For years, I told myself that was strength. It took a courtroom and an unfaithful husband to show me that the same strength I was proud of could be used against me. Grant Mercer had the kind of charm that worked best in short conversations. He could make you feel like the most important person in the room, then forget all about you before he reached the parking lot. I married him when I was 24. He sold industrial equipment across 3 counties, and for a long time we were fine, or at least fine enough to keep going. The real trouble began 3 years before the marriage ended, when one of his side ventures fell apart. He had put our savings, along with a large borrowed amount, into a partnership with a man who had promised far more than he could deliver. When everything came due, Grant sat across from me at the kitchen table, pale and silent. So I did what I had always done. I moved money from the business carefully and quietly, and I made the problem disappear before it could touch his credit or his pride. I thought I was protecting him. I expected nothing in return. What I received instead was a slow resentment I did not understand until much later. A man like Grant can forgive many things, but being rescued by his wife was not one of them. He began saying little things that sounded like jokes. "You always have to fix everything, don't you? Must be nice being the smart one." I would laugh softly and reach for his hand, thinking it was just embarrassment talking. But somewhere inside that humiliation, Grant had decided my competence was a form of control. To him, every spreadsheet became a reminder. Every solution felt like a leash. He never thanked me for saving him from the mess. He just started keeping score. I did not see the betrayal coming. Not then. But looking back, I understand that the night I covered his debt was the night our marriage truly ended. I simply kept the books open for 3 more years, trying to balance a relationship that had already run out of value, telling myself the numbers would work if I just tried a little harder. The signs were ordinary, and that is exactly why they are so easy to miss. Late meetings that became even later. A cologne I had never bought for him. His phone always turned face down, buzzing on the nightstand like something trapped under glass. I want to be clear about this because it matters to everything that happened next. I did not go searching through his life. I did not set traps. I did not record him. I did not read his messages in the dark. I have spent my entire career sitting close to other people's private problems, and I know the difference between noticing and crossing a line, so I simply noticed. The same way you notice a leak from the stain on the ceiling long before you ever find the pipe. Vivian Brandt was the name that kept appearing. She was the real estate agent who had sold us our house on Plum Street years earlier. Polished, pretty, always composed, and somehow always at the same gas station, the same coffee shop, the same charity walk. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Then one afternoon, Grant's phone lit up on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and one message appeared on the screen before I could look away. It was not a romantic message. That was what made my breath catch. It said, "Find out what her dad actually left her." Not, "I miss you." Not, "I love you." Just one cold little question about my father's inheritance from a woman who already knew what curtains hung in my living room. I stood there in my own kitchen and understood all at once that whatever was happening had stopped being about a marriage a long time ago. It had become a plan. Somewhere out there, two people were calculating the value of my life, my house, my business, my father's money, and I had still been pretending the marriage could be saved if I just balanced the numbers carefully enough. They had already started counting, so I started counting too. Here is what I stood to lose. So you understand why sleep became impossible. The house on Plum Street, where Hannah took her first steps and Cole lost his first tooth. The business with my name on the door. The only thing I had ever built completely on my own. My reputation in a town small enough that the woman who packs your groceries also sits 2 pews behind you on Sunday. And the trust of 2 children, 9 and 7, who still believed their parents were on the same team. That was the real ledger, the one that does not balance in dollars. But there was one more thing, and it was the part that mattered most, even though almost nobody knew it yet. When my father, Walt, passed away 5 years earlier, he left me money. Not a fortune, but enough to matter. Around $180,000, plus his share of a small piece of land outside town. My father had been a bookkeeper too, long before I was. And when he was young, he had trusted the wrong business partner and paid dearly for it. So before I was even old enough to drive, he taught me one rule. "Money has a memory," he used to say. "If you let it, keep one." What he meant was simple. Keep what belongs to you separate. Write down where it came from. Never let your accounts blur into someone else's. So when his money came to me, I followed his rule exactly. One account, my name only, never touched by anything from the marriage. Every deposit was documented in the same green ledger he had handed me when I was 16. His square handwriting was still there in the margins. "Separate," one column read in his hand. "Keep traceable." I had followed that rule my entire adult life without ever truly needing it. I did not yet know it was about to become the only wall standing between me and losing everything else. Grant did not tell me he was leaving. He had his lawyer tell me. The papers arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by hand to my office downtown, where the whole street could see someone walk in and leave my life on a stack of pages. I read them at my desk with the door closed. He was not simply asking for the marriage to end. He wanted the house. He wanted an equitable share of the marital business, which was a polished legal way of saying he wanted part of Lell Bookkeeping, the company he had never entered unless he needed money from me, and he wanted primary custody of Hannah and Cole. The lawyer's name was Trent Mercer, Grant's cousin on his mother's side. That told me everything I needed to know about whose idea this really was. The letter demanded that my company be submitted for a formal valuation as a marital asset. I sat completely still and felt the room shift around me. Then I did the only thing I know how to do when the numbers stop making sense. I called a professional. Maddie Okafor came recommended by another small business owner I had helped years earlier. She had a calm, dry way of speaking that made me trust her almost immediately. Within 10 minutes, I had told her everything. The other woman, the house, the company, the children. She listened without interrupting, writing notes in a careful, steady hand. When I finished, she did not promise me everything would be fine. She asked me one quiet, precise question, and the way she asked it made my stomach drop. "Rebecca," she said, "did you ever put your inheritance into a joint account?" In that silence, I realized she already understood the whole game. Everything Grant wanted depended on the answer to that single question. I held my breath before I answered, because I knew those words mattered more than almost anything I could say in court. "Never," I told her. "Not once." My father's voice felt like it was in the room with me when I said it. The inheritance had always stayed in its own account, under my name only. It had never been mixed with a single marital dollar. The business was a single-member LLC I had formed before Grant and I were even serious. It had its own books, its own tax filings, and a clean line of ownership going back 12 years. Maddie set down her pen. "Then they're chasing smoke," she said. "Under Ohio law, an inheritance that stays separate and traceable remains yours, and a business you owned before the marriage can stay separate too, as long as you can prove it was never mixed into marital property." For one brief second, I felt something loosen in my chest. Then Maddie leaned forward. "But Rebecca, this is the part you won't like. The law being on your side does not mean the fight will be simple. The burden will be on you to prove the path of every dollar with documents. Their entire strategy is probably to bet that somewhere over 12 years you got careless, that something blurred, that one line crossed another." I nodded slowly, understanding, "And while they make that bet, they will try to wear you down. Legal costs, delays, pressure." I nodded again. "And the town," I said. Maddie's mouth tightened. "The town is not a courtroom," she said. "The law cannot make people like you." That was the real problem, and we both knew it. The paperwork was solid. My father had made sure of that long before I was old enough to understand why. The problem was not going to be the law. The problem was Carol Mercer. She had already stood in front of half of Marysville and delivered her version of the story, and people had believed it. I walked back to my car with Maddie's words sitting heavy in my chest. I had the truth. I had the records. What I did not have was a single neighbor who believed I would ever need them. Carol Mercer did not raise her voice. She did not have to. She was 64, silver-haired, and the kind of woman who brought homemade pie to every service, remembered every child's birthday, and knew exactly when to lower her voice so people would lean closer. I learned the shape of her story secondhand, the way people always learn these things in small towns. She told them I was cold. She told them I kept Grant on an allowance. She told them I had hidden money for years. She said it was no wonder the poor man had looked for warmth somewhere else when his own wife treated him like an employee. She never used the harshest words herself. That was Carol's talent. She let other people reach the cruel conclusion on their own, while her hands stayed perfectly clean. Within 2 weeks, conversation stopped when I walked into a room. A woman whose taxes I had done nearly for free crossed the street rather than say hello. Vivian, meanwhile, had stopped pretending. She appeared beside Grant at a high school football game, then at the hardware store, then once at a restaurant where she laughed too loudly 2 tables away and rested her hand on his arm where everyone could see it. She was already behaving like the next Mrs. Mercer, already measuring my life for new curtains. And the worst part, the part that carved out something quiet inside me, was how alone it felt. For 12 years, I had been the person people trusted with their secrets, their numbers, and their fears. But now that I was the one being quietly pushed out of my own life, almost nobody could see it. Because here is what no one tells you. The woman who is good with money is often the last woman people believe can be taken advantage of. They look at the capable one, the organized one, the woman with the clean files and steady hands, and they cannot imagine she might be the one losing ground. They assume she must have a plan. They assume she must be fine, and sometimes that assumption is the loneliest part of all, so they do not ask themselves what really happened. They only wonder what she must have done to deserve it. Then Grant did the one thing I could not forgive. He brought the children into it. He had never been the parent who knew the pediatrician's number by heart, or which child hated crust on their sandwich, or who needed the nightlight turned slightly toward the wall. But suddenly he became the fun parent. He showed up with a new bike for Cole. He promised Hannah a horse. A horse. And in that careless way some weak men have, he let them believe that maybe, soon, they would all live together in a bigger, better house. He let them believe I was the only thing standing in the way. I found out when Hannah came home quiet one afternoon and asked me in that small, careful voice children use when they have heard something they were never meant to carry, "Mom, are we poor now?" I knelt down on the kitchen floor so we were eye to eye. I did not cry. I did not say one bad word about their father. I had decided early that no matter what Grant did, my children would never hear me tear down half of who they were. But right there on the linoleum, I made myself a promise. That night, I called Maddie and asked her how to protect them the right way. The next morning, we requested a guardian ad litem, a neutral person whose only responsibility would be to look at what was truly best for the children. I kept their school the same, their bedtimes the same, their soccer practices the same. Stability, Maddie told me, is its own kind of evidence. While Grant offered ponies and promises, I offered dinner at 6, clean clothes in their drawers, and the same hallway lamp glowing every night. It did not feel like winning. It felt like standing in a strong current, holding two small hands, refusing to let go while someone tried to pull them downstream with shiny distractions. "Mom?" Hannah asked again at bedtime. "We're okay, right?" I tucked the blanket under her chin. "We're okay," I told her. And for the first time, I made myself believe it might actually be true. The County Fall fundraiser was a Marysville tradition. Folding tables, casseroles, paper plates, and half the town packed into the church basement. I almost did not go, but staying home would have felt too much like admitting guilt, and I do not run. So I wore a simple navy dress, held my paper plate, made small talk, and felt the eyes on me the entire time. That sharp little prickle at the back of your neck when you know people are discussing you like you are not standing 10 feet away. Carol held court at the center table with Grant beside her and Vivian sitting boldly 2 seats down. I was pouring coffee when Carol's voice carried across the room. Not loud, just loud enough, sweet as the pie sitting in front of her. Someone asked with that polished kind of concern people use when they want gossip more than an answer, how poor Rebecca was holding up. Carol smiled like she was offering kindness. "Oh, she'll land on her feet," she said, "though I expect she'll be lucky to keep her maiden name." The table laughed, not loudly, not viciously, exactly, worse than that, comfortably. They laughed the easy laugh of people who had already decided the joke was fair. I set my coffee cup down without making a sound. I did not turn around. I did not give them the moment they were waiting for. The red face, the trembling voice, the scene that would prove everything Carol had been saying. I picked up my purse, walked out into the cold parking lot, listened to the gravel crunch beneath my flats, and got into my car. I did not cry. I want you to understand that because it surprised even me. I sat there in the dark with both hands on the steering wheel, and instead of falling apart, I reached into my purse, found a pen and an old receipt, and started making a list. And that list kept growing. I am a bookkeeper. So when my life began to come apart, I audited it. And in that audit, I found the thing that changed the entire shape of the fight. I pulled the joint mortgage records I had every legal right to see, and discovered that Grant had quietly refinanced the house on Plum Street 4 months before he filed. He had opened a home equity line of credit, and he had taken out nearly every dollar of equity we had built over 12 years. The money had not gone into savings. It had not gone toward the children. It had gone into a new investment, a property flipping venture with Vivian Brandt listed as a partner. And it got worse. To secure the business loan behind it, Grant had signed a personal guarantee. His own name was attached to the entire debt. I sat in my office beneath the green desk lamp and felt something I had not felt in months. Not rage, clarity. When I had first seen the refinance moving forward weeks earlier, I called the bank and tried to stop it. But it was a joint mortgage on a marital home. And with that kind of account, it took 2 signatures to freeze things, but only 1 to borrow against them. There was nothing I could legally do except watch. So I watched, and I wrote everything down. Every statement, every transfer, every date, exactly the way my father had taught me, exactly the way I had done for clients my entire career. And as the picture filled in, I understood something Grant clearly had not. He thought he was gathering assets, the house, the company, the future, but what he was really collecting was responsibility for debt. He was fighting with everything he had to win a pile of financial obligations, carrying his own signature. He simply had not read his paperwork carefully enough to realize it yet. Trent earned his fee by making my life expensive. That was the strategy. When the facts are not on your side, you do not try to win cleanly. You try to make the other person too exhausted and too drained to keep standing. He filed motion after motion. He demanded another business valuation, then another. He pushed for temporary support from me, painting me as the secret wealthy wife and Grant as the husband who had been treated unfairly. Every letter required an answer. Every answer cost money I would rather have spent on my children. There were nights when I sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. with the green ledger open in front of me, my father's handwriting still pressed into the margins, wondering whether being right was supposed to cost this much. Maddie kept me steady. "We do not fight loud," she told me more than once over the phone. "We fight on paper. Loud falls apart, paper holds." I held on to that like a railing. I kept showing up for my clients, kept the office open, kept Hannah's hair in 2 even braids before school. Even on mornings when my hands wanted to shake, I was exhausted in a way that does not always show, the quiet kind of exhaustion. The kind that hides behind a calm face, a steady voice, and hands that keep moving because stopping would mean feeling everything at once. And I want to pause here for a moment because I know some of you listening understand exactly what I mean. If you have ever been the person everyone leans on, the one who fixes things for everybody else, the one nobody remembers to ask about until she finally breaks her silence, then you know how quiet that kind of tired can be. You have carried it too. If this part feels close to your own life tonight, do me a favor. Leave a comment that simply says, "I see her." That way, I know you are out there. And make sure you subscribe, because the next part is the one you will not want to miss. Because the very next morning, I drove to the bank and picked up the one thing that changed everything. There is a difference between knowing you are right and being able to prove it. My father spent my entire childhood teaching me that difference. So I went and gathered the proof, all of it, in one place. I drove to the bank where my inheritance account had sat untouched for 5 years, and I requested a certified deposit history. The official kind, the kind with the bank's seal. It showed every dollar that had entered the account, and just as importantly, it showed that not one marital dollar had ever gone in or out. Then I drove to the office of my father's old attorney. He still kept Walt's probate file in a cabinet, and I had certified copies made of the will, the estate distribution papers, and the deed to the small parcel of land outside town. From my own records, I pulled the LLC formation documents for Lell bookkeeping. Dated. Filed. Established before Grant and I were married. I added 12 years of separate business tax returns. Then I put it all into one folder, thick as a phone book, and drove to my mother's house. I laid it on her kitchen table. Joan, my mother, 63 and sharp as a tack, looked down at the folder. Then she looked at me. I opened the green ledger beside it and turned to the page where my father's square handwriting still sat in the margins. The dates of those exact deposits, the word separate, and beneath it, keep traceable. The bank's certified dates matched his handwriting exactly. The thread ran unbroken from his hand to mine. I had everything, every document, every date, every signature. The complete sealed record showing that the company and the inheritance had never, not once in 12 years, become anyone's but mine. My mother placed her hand flat on the folder and stayed quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I did not fully understand yet. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes the smartest thing you can do is let them carry the load they fought so hard to take." I closed the folder like I was closing a door. At the time, I thought she was comforting me. She was not. She was giving me strategy. I just was not ready to hear it yet. I ran into Vivian in the grocery store parking lot on a gray afternoon. We both reached for the same cart return at the same time, and there was no graceful way to avoid each other. Up close, without the performance, she looked older than her 46 years, tired around the eyes. For one brief second, neither of us played our assigned role. "You think I'm the villain," she said quietly, not kindly, but not sharply either. I did not answer. She loaded her bags into her car, then said something so softly it almost sounded like she was speaking to herself. "You don't know what it's like to be my age with nothing. Twice I walked away with nothing." And for just a moment, I did see her. A woman who had bet on 2 marriages and lost both. A woman who had watched her settlements disappear. A woman who had decided somewhere along the way that the only thing that would not leave her was an asset with her name attached to it. I understood that fear. I had seen it in clients before. That quiet panic of someone who runs the numbers on the rest of their life and realizes the future does not add up. For one breath, I almost felt sorry for her. Then she straightened. The softness disappeared, and she slipped right back into the role like putting on a coat. "The house is practically mine already," she said with a small, cold smile. "Grant says the curtains can go. I never liked them anyway." And there it was. She had stood in my home, the home where my daughter had learned to walk, and had already decided which of my things she planned to remove. Whatever sympathy I had felt folded itself away. I pushed my cart toward my car. I did not hate her. Hate requires energy I no longer had to spare. But in that moment, I stopped mistaking her fear for an excuse. People can be afraid and still choose to be cruel. Vivian had made that choice with her eyes open. So I let her keep it. That weekend, my mother told me a story about my father that I had never heard before. We were standing at her sink, washing dishes while the children slept in the next room. She handed me a plate to dry and said, "Your dad did not always keep such careful books, you know." When Walt was young, before my mother, he had gone into business with a friend he trusted like a brother. They shook hands instead of signing papers. They kept the money together in one account because, back then, that was what trust looked like to him. And then his friend emptied the account and walked away. There was nothing on paper to prove what belonged to whom. "He did not just lose the money," my mother said. "He lost the proof. It took him years to come back from it, and after that, he wrote everything down. Every dollar, every date, every line." That was where the green ledger came from. That was where money has a memory came from. It was not a habit, it was a scar. My father had taught me to keep my world separate and documented, not because he was overly careful, but because he had once trusted a handshake and lost almost everything, and he was determined that I never would. I dried the plate slowly, feeling the weight of that story settle somewhere deep inside me. All those years I had thought my father's rule was about being organized. It was not. It was about being protected. My mother dried her hands on a towel and looked at me with the same steady gaze my father used to have. "Your father used to say something at the card table," she told me. He'd say, "The loudest person sitting there usually owns the least." I laughed. A real laugh. The first one in weeks, because I had just spent 2 months being drowned out by people who were acting certain while betting far more than they could afford to lose. And I was beginning to think my father had been right about them too. A week before the hearing, Maddie laid everything out for me like a chessboard, not like someone explaining a game, like someone showing a woman how to survive the next move. "Here's where we are," she said. "Their case has 3 legs. First, they want the company treated as marital property. Second, they want your inheritance treated as mixed funds. Third, they want the house and other assets divided as marital property, which, legally, they are." She tapped each finger as she spoke. "2 of those legs we can take away from them. The company is separate. The inheritance is traceable. Your documents are solid. But the house, the cars, the furniture, those are marital, and Grant has the legal right to fight for his share." I nodded slowly. "So we fight for the house?" Maddie tilted her head and studied me. "We can," she said. "It is a fight we might even win." I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been forming in my mind ever since I pulled those mortgage records. "Maddie," I said carefully, "what is the house actually worth right now?" After the refinance, after the home equity line Grant had drained, after the loan he had personally guaranteed for the venture with Vivian, Maddie went quiet. She pulled out the appraisal, the payoff figures, and the loan documents. Then she ran the numbers in front of me. I watched her expression change as the final total landed on the page. The equity in the house on Plum Street was gone. Not low, gone. And once the debt attached to it was included, it was worse than gone. The marital assets Grant was fighting so hard to take were worth less than nothing. I leaned back in the chair. Somewhere in the back of my mind, my mother's voice came back to me. Let them carry the load they fought for. And for the first time, I understood exactly what she had meant. The prize they wanted was not a prize at all. It was a burden, and they had built it with their own hands. I made Maddie walk me through it 3 times because it sounded too perfect, and I am a woman who does not trust numbers that sound too perfect. But the math held. The house on Plum Street, after Grant's refinance and the home equity line he had poured into Vivian's property venture, carried more debt than it was worth. Whoever walked away with that house would also walk away with the mortgage, the credit line, and the obligations tied to it. And then there was the company. Grant wanted half of Lel Bookkeeping, valued as a business, but Maddie pointed out the one thing his cousin Trent had never seemed to understand. A bookkeeping practice is not just a building. It is not just a name on a glass door. It is you, Maddie said. The clients stay because they trust Rebecca Lel. Take Rebecca out of it, and what is left to value? A lease, a few desks, and some filing cabinets. Even if a judge somehow treated the company as marital property, which the documents made highly unlikely, half of that company without me running it was worth almost nothing. The clients would follow me out the door the same week. I sat in that small office and felt the whole shape of their plan reveal itself piece by piece. They had spent months, money, and the town's sympathy, fighting to take 3 things from me. The house, which had become a pit of debt, the company, which had little value without the woman they were trying to separate from it, and the children, whom the guardian ad litem was already beginning to see they barely understood. Everything Grant was fighting to win was tied, dollar for dollar, to the very obligations that could pull him under. And the most remarkable part, the part I still think about even now, is that I had not set a single trap. They had done all of it themselves. I had only kept the records. It would be a cleaner story if the truth had set me free right then. It did not. The town did not know any of what I knew, and the gossip reached its highest point in those final weeks. Carol's version had hardened into fact through sheer repetition. I was the cold wife who had hidden money and pushed a good man out of his home. I heard third hand that she had repeated her little line about my maiden name at a women's circle, and everyone had laughed. A friend I had known since high school, a woman whose struggling bakery I had helped keep open for 2 years, stopped returning my calls. That one stayed with me. I could have pushed back. I could have walked into that church basement with the certified mortgage records, the loan documents, and the personal guarantee and shown them exactly what Grant had done. Maddie advised against it, and I agreed. Save the truth for the room where it matters, she told me. A courtroom, not a gossip circle. The moment you start explaining yourself to people who have already chosen a story, you are playing their game. So I stayed quiet. I let them think what they wanted to think. Silence, when you choose it on purpose, feels different from silence forced on you, but even chosen silence can still hurt. It nearly broke me the day Hannah came home from school, climbed onto the couch, and told me very seriously that a girl in her class said we were going to lose our house and have nowhere to go. I held her close. I did not promise her the house because by then I knew we were going to let it go. Instead, I knelt in front of her and made her a different promise. A specific one. I looked right into her eyes and said, "We will always have a home. I built one once from almost nothing. I can do it again." She believed me. Now I had to make it true. The week before the hearing, Maddie and I built the file the way you build a wall. Brick by brick, every brick certified brick. The deposit history with the bank's seal, the probate documents, the LLC formation papers, dated and filed before the marriage, 12 years of separate business tax returns, the mortgage records, the refinance paperwork, the home equity line, Grant's personal guarantee on the business loan. All of it came from public records and joint records I had every right to access. Nothing hidden, nothing dramatic, just paper, clean, dated, signed, and impossible to talk around. Not one piece of it came from anything hidden. No private recordings, no messages taken out of context, no secret notes I had kept in the dark. Every document in that folder was official, institutional, the kind of paper a clerk stamps, a lawyer respects, and a judge cannot easily ignore. My father's entire philosophy was stacked in one folder. The day before the hearing, Maddie let me sit in the empty courtroom for a few minutes, just so the room would feel less unfamiliar when it mattered. It was cold inside. The old radiator along the wall clanked and hissed like it had its own opinions, and the wooden benches felt hard beneath my hands. My heart was moving faster than I wanted it to, so I sat there, listened to the radiator, and made myself breathe. That was when Maddie told me the real plan. The plan my mother had understood before either of us. "When they ask for the house," she said, "do not argue. When they ask for the marital assets, let them have them. Give them the argument they came here to win. Sign them over." I must have looked at her like she had lost her mind because she smiled just a little. "Trust me, Rebecca, the hardest thing we can do to these people is let them win exactly what they asked for." I looked at the empty judge's bench, cold and silent at the front of the room, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to calm. I finally understood my mother's 2 words. I just had not heard her say them yet. They made one final move before the hearing, and it told me everything about what they were really after. Trent reached out with a settlement offer, dressed up like generosity. If I would simply agree to put my business into the marital property discussion, they would go easy on support. They might even let me keep the smaller car. It was presented as kindness, but it was a trap wrapped in polite language because the company was already mine, clear, separate, protected by the records and by the law. The only way it could ever become something they could divide was if I voluntarily signed it into the marital pile myself. They could not take it from me. They needed me to give it to them. They wanted my signature more than they wanted the truth. And once I saw that, I saw them clearly. At the meeting, Trent slid the papers across the table. With a careful little performance of reasonableness, he said it might help if I handed over the office keys as a gesture of good faith while things were being sorted out. Out of pure habit, I reached into my purse. My fingers closed around the brass key. The old one, worn smooth from 12 years of 6 a.m. openings. I rested my hand on the table. Then I stopped. I drew my hand back, the key still closed inside my fist, and very politely I said, "No." Just that. Trent's smile flickered. He had not expected the quiet woman to say no. I left the papers unsigned on the table and walked out with my key in my pocket. And in that moment, I finally understood which one of us had been pretending. Their whole plan depended on me being too tired, too pressured, or too afraid to read what they put in front of me. They had chosen the wrong bookkeeper, so I made my decision. And it was the opposite of what everyone expected. I would not fight for the house. I would not contest a single piece of the marital property they wanted so badly. I would let them have all of it. The house on Plum Street, with its drained equity and heavy mortgage. The furniture, the cars, the entire polished pile of responsibility tied neatly with a ribbon. What I would never do was sign away the company, and I would never pretend my inheritance was anything other than what the records proved it was. Separate, traceable, mine. And when it came to Hannah and Cole, I would stand firm with everything I had. That was the line. Maddie confirmed the strategy was sound. "You give up the marital assets that are already underwater," she said. "You protect the separate property that is solid, and you keep the custody discussion focused on stability, which you have more than enough of." It was surrender on the surface, strategy underneath. It was my mother's whisper before I had even heard it spoken aloud. The load they had fought so hard to carry, handed to them gift-wrapped. I will not pretend I was not afraid. Walking into a courtroom prepared to let go of the house where your children grew up is a strange and lonely kind of courage. The night before, I sat at my mother's kitchen table instead of my own. The green ledger lay open in front of me, turned to my father's handwriting. I read those 2 words again. Separate. Traceable. My whole defense, written years earlier by a man who had once been betrayed and had made sure his daughter would never be left unprotected the same way. I was about to walk into that room and hand the Mercers their prize. I was about to let them smile while they believed they had won. And the only person on earth, besides Maddie, who understood why I could smile back, was the woman who had raised me. Tomorrow my mother would lean over and say those 2 words out loud, and this time I would be ready to hear them. I did not sleep much the night before the hearing. I lay in the spare room at my mother's house while the children slept quietly down the hall, and I rehearsed staying calm. That was the whole job. Maddie had told me not to win the argument. "Let them win the argument," she said, "and let the facts decide the ending." So I practiced the flat, polite voice I would use, the voice that gives the other side nothing to hold on to. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went into the kitchen. I opened the green ledger one more time. My father's handwriting looked back at me the way it always had. Careful columns, exact dates. One single word standing guard over 5 years of an account nobody had managed to touch. Separate. I ran my thumb over the brass office key on my ring. Then I thought about Hannah on the couch, asking whether we would have nowhere to go. And I thought about the promise I had made her. We will always have a home. I made numbers add up for a living. I knew how to begin with almost nothing and build something real, because I had already done it once before, in a garage, with a folding table and a calculator whose 7-key barely worked. I could do it again. By the time the sun came up, I was not fearless, but I was ready. I was not going to walk into that courtroom and try to be louder than the Mercers. I was not going to be angrier. I was not going to be crueler. My father had already told me how that kind of table ends. I was going to walk in quiet, prepared, and right, with a folder full of certified truth and a brass key in my pocket. And I was going to let them talk themselves all the way into the place they had spent 2 months building. All I had to do was keep my hands steady and my voice low. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like floor wax and cold coffee. The Mercers were already there, and they were not nervous. They were celebrating too early. Carol sat perfectly straight in her good coat, holding court even in the hallway. Grant stood with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man waiting to collect something he believed already belonged to him. Vivian had actually come. That alone almost made me laugh. She stood beside Grant, murmuring something behind her hand, and I caught the word curtains again. This time, I nearly smiled. Trent shuffled his papers with the confidence of a man who had not read them carefully enough. The old radiator in the hallway clanked and hissed, that same restless sound. The wooden bench felt cold through my dress as I sat down to wait. My heart was loud in my chest, so I focused on the radiator, on the rhythm of it, like a metronome, and I made my breathing match it. Slow, even, steady. My mother sat beside me and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, dry, and calm. Then she leaned close, so close her breath moved my hair, and whispered the 2 words that stopped me cold in that hallway. The 2 words I had been circling for weeks without fully understanding. Give her everything. That was it, just that. Give Vivian everything. Give Carol everything. Give Grant everything. Give the whole smiling, whispering group exactly what they had come to take. And in that second, with my mother's warm hand around mine, my father's ledger in the folder on my lap, and the radiator clanking like a second heartbeat, I finally understood her completely. She was not telling me to lose. She was telling me to let them win the exact thing that would expose what they had done to themselves. The courtroom doors opened. The case was called. I stood, smoothed my navy dress, and walked in to do exactly what my mother had told me. I gave them everything. That was the first move, and it landed like a gift, exactly the way Maddie said it would. When the judge turned to the matter of the marital home, Trent began his rehearsed demand, fully prepared for a fight. I simply nodded to Maddie. She stood and said in a calm, almost generous tone that her client did not contest the marital home and would sign over her interest in it entirely. Trent stopped mid-sentence. He had loaded a cannon for a door that was already open. Grant looked at his mother. Carol's face shifted into something close to a smile. Then we went down the list, item by item, and each time, Maddie barely lifted her hand. The cars, his; the furniture, his; the appliances, his; the contents of the house on Plum Street, his; the savings account, drained as it was, his; every visible, polished piece of the life they had spent months fighting to take, every item they had used the town's sympathy to chase, I signed away with a steady hand and a calm face. And with every signature, the Mercers became more openly pleased. Carol even reached over and squeezed Grant's arm. Vivian sat a little straighter in the gallery, already imagining the house as hers. They thought I was finished. They thought the cold, calculating wife had finally folded. They thought the gossip, the pressure, and the public humiliation had worn me down until I was giving up without a fight. So I let them think it. I kept my eyes lowered and my pen moving. The picture of a defeated woman doing the only thing left to do. The only thing I held back was the company. And when Trent tried to slide Lel bookkeeping into the agreement, Maddie produced the LLC documents. Dated, certified, filed before the marriage. The judge glanced at them, reviewed the record, and moved on without much comment. Because there was nothing useful there for Trent to argue. Through all of it, I kept one hand in my lap. And in that hand, hidden from everyone, I held the brass key to my office. Smooth, warm, still mine. They could have the house they could see. They could not have the thing I had built with my own hands, because that had never belonged to them in the first place. They signed the agreement before anyone fully discussed the appraisal. They signed before the debt figures were walked into the record. They signed in triumph. All three of them looked almost radiant. That was the plan. And the plan was only beginning. Then Maddie stood to address the financial record. And slowly, the air in the room began to change. She spoke quietly, almost kindly, the way you explain a hard truth to someone you do not entirely dislike. First, she submitted the certified deposit history for my inheritance account. 5 years of records, sealed by the bank, every dollar traceable to my father's estate, not $1 mixed with marital funds. Under Ohio law, she explained, separate property that remains traceable stays separate, and the burden of proof had been met right there, in black and white. The judge reviewed the documents and nodded. The inheritance was mine, untouched, protected, exactly as it had always been. Second came the company, a single-member LLC formed before the marriage, supported by 12 years of independent books, separate tax returns, and a clean ownership history. Separate, mine, documented from the beginning. Trent shifted in his seat. Then Maddie turned to the marital home. The very house the Mercers had just accepted so eagerly. She entered the refinance documents into the record. Then the home equity line Grant had drawn from months before filing. Then the appraisal showing the property's current value. The numbers were read aloud. The equity was gone. Then came the final document, the one that changed the room completely. The personal guarantee Grant had signed for the business loan connected to Vivian's property venture, a loan secured against him and tied to the very house he had just been awarded. Maddie set the document down and folded her hands. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "my client has agreed that Mr. Mercer may assume the marital home and all associated obligations. We have no objection." The silence in that courtroom was complete. I watched realization move across their faces like a shadow passing over a field. Trent snatched up the appraisal and read it again. His confident expression slowly folded in on itself. Grant leaned over his shoulder, and I watched the color leave his face as he finally understood. The house he had fought so hard to keep was not a prize. It was an anchor. The debt he had tucked away so carefully was now his to carry, attached to his own signature, connected to a property worth less than what was owed on it. He had won every single thing he asked for, and what he had won was a mountain of obligation with his name written across the top. I sat with my hands folded and my voice unused. Because I did not need to say a word, my mother's 2 words were already doing all the talking. Give her everything. And they had taken it, eagerly, gratefully, on the record, before they understood what came with it. The judge looked over the top of his glasses at the Mercer side of the room, and into that perfect silence, Carol Mercer lost her composure. I had never seen it before. Not in 64 years of polished manners, homemade pies, and perfect church smiles. She was on her feet before the judge could finish speaking. Her sweet Sunday voice was gone, replaced by something sharp and uncontrolled. First, she turned on Trent. She demanded to know how he had let this happen, why he had not seen it, what exactly he thought he had been doing. Trent stammered something about disclosure and timelines while trying to gather papers that no longer seemed to help him. Then Carol turned on Grant, her own son, and the things she said to him were harsher than anything she had ever whispered about me, because they were true, and everyone in the room could hear them. He had been careless. He had followed Vivian into a plan he did not understand. He had cost the family the house they thought they were winning, and tied himself to a debt no Mercer was prepared to carry. Grant turned toward the gallery, searching for Vivian, the partner whose venture had swallowed the equity, the woman who had told him the house would be theirs. But Vivian was already standing, already moving toward the doors. Her face had closed completely, like a business locking up for the night. The judge called for order. The bailiff stepped forward, and the entire Mercer side of the courtroom dissolved into the exact kind of public scene Carol had spent 2 months pretending I would make. I sat perfectly still through all of it. I did not smile. I did not speak over anyone. I did not raise my voice once. There was nothing left for me to say that the documents had not already said better. When the room finally settled, the judge moved to the matter of the children. The guardian ad litem's report was plain. Through every month of the process, one parent had kept the children's lives steady. Same school, same routines, same bedtime, same practices, same sense of safety. The other parent had made big promises, offered shiny distractions, and spent more and more time living out of bags with a woman the children had barely met. Primary custody went to me. Clear and formal. Grant received a standard visitation schedule. I felt something in my chest unlock. Quietly. The way a breath lets go after being held too long. Hannah and Cole were mine to keep safe. I had promised my daughter we would always have a home. Now I could build one. I had said almost nothing in that courtroom. I had not needed to. Everything that mattered had been said years before. In a green ledger, at a kitchen table, in my father's careful handwriting. The loudest people at the table, as it turned out, had owned the least all along. Vivian did not even make it to the parking lot before things ended. I saw it through the hallway windows while I gathered my folder, the old radiator still clanking beside me. She had stopped Grant just outside the doors. Whatever he was trying to say, she was not staying to hear it. The house she had helped him fight for was now a heavy debt, and a man tied to a loan he could not comfortably carry was not the future she had come looking for. Vivian had spent her adult life learning to tell the difference between a man with real stability and a man who only looked stable from a distance. And in about 30 seconds, she read Grant perfectly. Then she walked to her car without looking back. Her great fear, the one she had admitted to me in that grocery store parking lot, had become real by her own choices. She had wanted security so badly that she had helped create the very opposite. Then Carol found me in the hallway. Her composure had been hastily put back together. Her church voice was trying to return. She said she wanted to talk. In that reasonable tone of hers, she wondered whether we might revisit some of this, whether I really wanted to leave the house and all its complications to Grant, whether there was some kind of family arrangement we could make. I looked at the woman who had stood in a church basement and told half the town I would be lucky to keep my maiden name. Then I reached into my pocket and closed my hand around the brass key one more time. And finally, I felt completely calm. "No, Carol," I said gently, the way you correct someone who still refuses to understand. "I am keeping what I built. You can keep what you fought for." Then I picked up my folder, took my mother's arm, and walked toward the doors. Behind us, the radiator clanked like applause. My mother waited with me at the top of the courthouse steps in the thin gold light of a cold afternoon. We did not cheer. We did not fall into each other's arms the way people do in movies. That was not who we were. She simply looked at me. I looked back at her. Then she gave me one small nod, the kind of nod that says more than an entire speech ever could. I thought about my father, about the handshake that had cost him so much, about the ledger he had kept every day after that, almost like a promise that his daughter would never have to learn that same lesson the hard way. I had followed his rule my whole life without truly needing it. Today, that rule had stood between me and everything they tried to take, like a wall he had built, long before I knew I would need shelter behind it. Behind us, faintly, I could still hear the Mercers arguing in the marble hallway. The sound grew thinner as the courthouse doors swung closed. Ahead of us, 2 children were waiting at my mother's house, and somewhere inside, a hallway lamp had been left on. I took the first step down, then the next. I had walked into that courthouse prepared to lose everything. I walked out having kept the only things that had ever truly been mine. The rest came the way real consequences usually come. Slowly at first, then all at once. Within 8 months, Grant could no longer carry the house on Plum Street or the loan tied to it. The bank began its process, and the home where my children had taken their first steps was listed for a short sale. It sold to strangers for less than what was owed against it. The personal guarantee Grant had signed followed him into his credit, his future, and every serious financial conversation he would have for years. Vivian had already moved on to whatever came next. The venture folded. The partnership ended. And Carol, who had spent months moving her version of the story through the church kitchen and the women's circle, discovered something about small towns. They may be slow to understand, but they do remember. Once the dust settled, the casseroles came less often. The pew beside her grew a little emptier. People are not wrong forever. As for me, I kept the office with my name on the glass door. Some of the clients who had drifted away during the gossip quietly came back, a little embarrassed, a little careful. I took them on without making them explain. A grudge is just another kind of debt, and I had decided I was not carrying that one. Within the year, I bought a small house on the east side of town. 3 bedrooms, a good kitchen. Paid for with my own separate, traceable money. Hannah chose the paint for her room. Cole claimed the yard for a future dog, and every night I left a lamp glowing in the hallway, just like I always had, only this time the home it lit was completely, unmistakably ours. People in town still ask me about it sometimes, carefully. The way people ask about a painful chapter when they are not sure whether it still hurts. They ask if I lost everything, the house, the marriage, my place in town. And I always tell them the same thing, because it is the truth, and because I earned the right to enjoy it a little. I gave her everything, the house, the cars, the whole bright life she had already started decorating in her mind. I signed it all over with a calm smile. She just had no idea, none of them did, what everything was actually going to cost. I keep my boundaries with the Mercers polite and firm. Grant sees the children on schedule. We do not discuss curtains. My former mother-in-law once told a room full of people that I would be lucky to keep my maiden name. I think about that line more often than I probably should, mostly because of how it turned out. The name Lel is still on the glass door of my office downtown, a little brighter now since I had the lettering redone. It is the name on my children's school forms, the name on the deed to a house I paid for myself, the name written inside the ledger my father handed me when I was 16. I did not just keep my maiden name. I kept everything that name had ever truly belonged to, and here is the only lesson from all of it that is worth passing on. Walking away with less in your hands does not always mean walking away with less, not when what remains is finally, fully yours. That is my story. One sentence whispered by my mother. One ledger my father taught me to keep, and one courtroom full of people who fought as hard as they could to win a burden they had never bothered to understand. If this story reminded you that quiet and documented can outlast loud and certain, take it as a sign. Keep your own records, keep your own name, and never confuse losing what they can see with losing what truly belongs to you. If you know a woman who needs to hear this, share it with her. Leave a comment, subscribe for the next story, and I will see you again soon.